Anti-Dühring. By Friedrich Engels. 1877. Part 2. Political Economy. 6. Simple and compound labor. Herr Dühring has discovered in Marx a gross blunder in economics that a schoolboy would blush at, a blunder which at the same time contains a socialist heresy very dangerous to society. Marx's theory of value is, quote, nothing but the ordinary theory that labor is the cause of all values and labor time is their measure. But the question of how the distinct value of so-called skilled labor is to be conceived is left in complete obscurity. It is true that in our theory also only the labor time expended can be the measure of the natural cost and therefore of the absolute value of economic things, but here the labor time of each individual must be considered absolutely equal, to start with, and it is only necessary to examine where, in skilled production, the labor time of other persons, for example in the tool used, is added to the separate labor time of the individual. Therefore the position is not, as in Herr Marx's hazy conception, that the labor time of one person is in itself more valuable than that of another, because more average labor time is condensed as it were within it, but all labor time is in principle and without exception and therefore without any need to take first an average, absolutely equal in value, and in regard to the work done by a person, as also in regard to every finished product. All that requires to be ascertained is how much of the labor time of other persons may be concealed in what appears to be only his own labor time. Whether it is a hand tool for production, or the hand, or even the head itself, which could not have acquired its special characteristics and capacity for work without the labor time of others, is not of the slightest importance in the strict application of the theory. In his lucubrations on value, however, Herr Marx never rid himself of the ghost of a skilled labor time which lurks in the background. He was unable to effect a thoroughgoing change here because he was hampered by the traditional mode of thought of the educated classes, to whom it necessarily appears monstrous to recognize the labor time of a porter and that of an architect as of absolutely equal value from the standpoint of economics. End of quote. The passage in Marx which calls forth this mightier wrath on Herr Dühring's part is very brief. Marx is examining what it is that determines the value of commodities and gives the answer, the human labor embodied in them. This, he continues, quote, is the expenditure of simple labor power which, on an average, apart from any special development, exists in the organism of every ordinary individual. Skilled labor counts only as simple labor intensified, or rather, has multiplied simple labor, a given quantity of skilled being considered equal to a greater quantity of simple labor. Experience shows that this reduction is constantly being made. The commodity may be the product of the most skilled labor, but its value, by equating it to the product of simple unskilled labor, represents a definite quantity of the latter labor alone. The different proportions in which different sorts of labor are reduced to unskilled labor as their standard, are established by a social process that goes on behind the backs of the producers, and, consequently, appear to be fixed by custom. End quote. Marx is dealing here first of all only with the determination of the value of commodities, i.e., of objects which, within a society composed of private producers, are produced and exchanged against each other by these private producers for their private account. In this passage, therefore, there is no question whatever of absolute value wherever this may be in existence, but of the value which is current in a definite form of society. This value, in this definite historical sense, is shown to be created and measured by the human labor embodied in the individual commodities, and this human labor is further shown to be the expenditure of simple labor power. But not all labor is a mere expenditure of simple human labor power. Very many sorts of labor involve the use of capabilities or knowledge acquired with the expenditure of greater or lesser effort, time and money. Do these kinds of compound labor produce, in the same interval of time, the same commodity values as simple labor, the expenditure of mere simple labor power? Obviously not. The product of 1 hour of compound labor is a commodity of a higher value, perhaps double or treble, in comparison with the product of 1 hour of simple labor. The values of the products of compound labor are expressed by this comparison in definite quantities of simple labor, but this reduction of compound labor is established by a social process which goes on behind the backs of the producers, by a process which at this point, in the development of the theory of value, can only be stated but not as yet explained. It is this simple fact, taking place daily before our eyes in present-day capitalist society, which is here stated by Marx. This fact is so indisputable that even Herr Dühring does not venture to dispute it either in his cursus or in his history of political economy, and the Marxian presentation is so simple and lucid that no one but Herr Dühring is left in complete obscurity by it. Because of his complete obscurity he mistakes the commodity value, which alone Marx was for the time being concerned with investigating, for the natural cost which makes the obscurity still more complete, and even for the absolute value which so far as our knowledge goes has never before had currency in political economy. But whatever Herr Dühring may understand by the natural cost, and whichever of his 5 kinds of value may have the honor to represent absolute value, this much at least is sure, that Marx is not discussing any of these things, but only the value of commodities, and that in the whole section of Capital which deals with value there is not even the slightest indication of whether or to what extent Marx considers this theory of the value of commodities applicable also to other forms of society. Quote, Therefore the position is not, and of quote. Herr Dühring proceeds, quote, as in Herr Marx's hazy conception, that the labor time of one person is in itself more valuable than that of another, because more average labor time is condensed as it were within it, but all labor time is in principle and without exception and therefore without any need to take first an average, absolutely equal in value. End quote. It is fortunate for Herr Dühring that fate did not make him a manufacturer, and thus saved him from fixing the value of his commodities on the basis of this new rule and thereby running infallibly into the arms of bankruptcy. But say, are we here still in the society of manufacturers? No, far from it. With his natural cost and absolute value Herr Dühring has made us take a leap, a veritable salto mortal, out of the present evil world of exploiters into his own economic commune of the future, into the pure, heavenly air of equality and justice, and so we must now, even though prematurely, take a glance at this new world. It is true that, according to Herr Dühring's theory, only the labor time expended can measure the value of economic things even in the economic commune, but as a matter of course the labor time of each individual must be considered absolutely equal to start with. All labor time is in principle and, without exception, absolutely equal in value, without any need to take first an average. And now compared with this radically equalitarian socialism Marx's hazy conception that the labor time of one person is in itself more valuable than that of another, because more average labor time is condensed as it were within a conception which held Marx captive by reason of the traditional mode of thought of the educated classes, to whom it necessarily appears monstrous that the labor time of a porter and that of an architect should be recognized as of absolutely equal value from the standpoint of economics. Unfortunately Marx put a short footnote to the passage in Capital cited above. Quote, the reader must note that we are not speaking here of the wages or value that the laborer gets for a given labor time, but of the value of the commodity in which that labor time is materialized. End of quote. Marx, who seems here to have had a presentiment of the coming of his Dühring, therefore safeguards himself against an application of his statements quoted above even to the wages which are paid in existing society for compound labor. And if Herr Dühring, not content with doing this all the same, presents these statements as the principles on which Marx would like to see the distribution of the necessaries of life regulated in society organized socialistically, he is guilty of a shameless imposture, the like of which is only to be found in the gangster press. But let us look a little more closely at the doctrine of equality in values. All labor time is entirely equal in value, the porters and the architects. So labor time, and therefore labor itself, has a value. But labor is the creator of all values. It alone gives the products found in nature value in the economic sense. Value itself is nothing else than the expression of the socially necessary human labor materialized in an object. Labor can therefore have no value. One might as well speak of the value of value, or try to determine the weight, not of a heavy body, but of heaviness itself, as speak of the value of labor, and try to determine it. Herr Dühring dismisses people like Cohen, Saint-Simon and Fourier by calling them social alchemists. His subtilizing over the value of labor time, that is, of labor, shows that he ranks far beneath the real alchemists. And now let the reader fathom Herr Dühring's brazenness in imputing to Marx the assertion that the labor time of one person is in itself more valuable than that of another, that labor time, and therefore labor, has a value to Marx, who first demonstrated that labor can have no value, and why it cannot. For socialism, which wants to emancipate human labor power from its status of a commodity, the realization that labor has no value and can have none is of great importance. Was this realization all attempts, inherited by Herr Dühring from primitive workers' socialism, to regulate the future distribution of the necessaries of life as a kind of higher wages fall to the ground, and from it comes the further realization that distribution, in so far as it is governed by purely economic considerations, will be regulated by the interests of production, and that production is most encouraged by a mode of distribution which allows all members of society to develop, maintain and exercise their capacities with maximum universality. It is true that, to the mode of thought of the educated classes which Herr Dühring has inherited, it must seem monstrous that in time to come there will no longer be any professional porters or architects, and that the man who for half an hour gives instructions as an architect will also act as a porter for a period, until his activity as an architect is once again required. A fine sort of socialism that would be perpetuating professional porters. If the equality of value of labor time means that each laborer produces equal values in equal periods of time, without there being any need to take an average, then this is obviously wrong. If we take two workers, even in the same branch of industry, the value they produce in 1 hour of labor time will always vary with the intensity of their labor and their skill, and not even an economic commune, at any rate not on our planet, can remedy this evil which, however, is only an evil for people like Dühring. What, then, remains of the complete equality of value of any and every labor? Nothing but the purely braggart phrase, which has no other economic foundation than Herr Dühring's incapacity to distinguish between the determination of value by labor and determination of value by wages. Nothing but the ukase, the basic law of the new economic commune, equal wages for equal labor time. Indeed, the old French communist workers and Weitling had much better reasons for the equality of wages which they advocated. How then are we to solve the whole important question of the higher wages paid for compound labor? In a society of private producers, private individuals or their families pay the costs of training the qualified worker, hence the higher price paid for qualified labor power accrues first of all to private individuals. The skillful slave is sold for a higher price, and the skillful wage earner is paid higher wages. In a socialistically organized society, these costs are borne by society, and to it therefore belong the fruits, the greater values produced by compound labor. The worker himself has no claim to extra pay. And from this, incidentally, follows the moral that at times there is a drawback to the popular demand of the workers for the full proceeds of labor. Footnote 87.